you're a pro baseball player, let's be honest, you're already in the top 1% of people who play this game. You should never overhaul. You should never drop one philosophy that's worked for you and go to another. You tinker. You change that 1% to 2% to try to find that competitive advantage that's going to take you to that next level. So, and that's where it always comes back to like this: just don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Figure out what works, keep it, and then add subtle things that can make a difference for you.
May I have your attention, please?
Give me my heater.
Now listening to Clear the Mechanism.
The Robbie Rhodes Show.
The Robbie Rhodes Show.
What's up, guys? My name is Robbie Roll, and I'm the host of the show you're listening to, which is called The Robbie Rhodes Show. Episode 39, I have a great, sensational, phenomenal, extravagant, I can't think of any more words to describe this podcast for you guys, but my guest today is the one and only Eric Cressey. If you don't know him and you're in the baseball space, then you've been living under a rock. I would say he's probably one of the leaders in the training / baseball world, just from his, laundry list of guys that he's trained and the track record that the guys he's trained has shown, leads me to believe that he's one of the best. I know from a personal experience of having teammates that have gone to him and trained with him, just, the uniqueness, the attention to detail, the individual approaches, just everything that he does with his athletes is just top tier. And, obviously a great guy too, agreeing to come on the show. And we talked for about an hour, and, he was driving from Florida to Massachusetts. So I appreciate his time. I don't want to spend too much time with an introduction here, just because the podcast itself is so juicy. So we'll go ahead and get right to it. If you haven't already, I'd appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button, hit that, share button. If you want to leave a review, again, I appreciate it. I don't want to be the guy that's constantly begging for those things, but again, they do help my podcast out, and they do help me out as a podcaster. I guess I can say that now, right? That's pretty cool. Again, my name's Robbie Rowe, and you can find me on Instagram where I am most active, Robbie Rowe 12. That's Robbie with a Y. Again, I want to reiterate, every single thing that Eric and I talk about in today's episode will be linked into the show notes. Whatever platform you're listening to it on, there should be a details button, or there should be a drop-down menu, or maybe even a show more button that will drop down the show notes to this episode, and I will have links included in there, a couple names that we drop. I want to link their Instagram accounts. We mentioned a podcast in this episode that I want to link as well, and a couple tools that he utilizes with his athletes. So again, this is the Robbie Rowe Show, episode 39, Eric Cressey with Cressey Sports Performance. But before we actually get to the podcast, I want to take this time, a little brief thank you to the company Pocket Radar for sponsoring the Robbie Rowe Show for this month. If you haven't already, you can check their product out. I have links to that. Again, go back to the show notes. But I've been using Pocket Radar for the last, I want to say, 4 or 5 years. Just making it a lot easier on me as an athlete. I think, again, Eric and I talk about in this particular show, with the demand for velocity that we're seeing in today's game, it's no secret, I think, anymore that you're not gonna get drafted, or you're not gonna get to where you want to go if you're a pitcher, unless you do bring to the table some high velocity numbers. And I think according to how to go about that, I think every time that you touch a ball, there has to be an importance on max intent, and I think a good tool to utilize that is Pocket Radar. It's not going to break the bank on getting like one of the really expensive guns that you see scouts use, but it is going to give you the tool to allow you to track your numbers, track your progress, And I think they're just doing a really cool thing in today's space. And me personally, I will always be utilizing their products and saying good things about the company in general, just because they are great people. So go ahead and check them out in the show notes. There's some links there that you can check them out at, and they're also on Amazon, and you should Google them, I guess. But there's some videos on my Instagram as well utilizing the tool. So without further ado, let's get to the episode 39. Eric Cressey. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I hope you enjoy it. All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Another episode of The Robbie Rowe Show, episode 39 to be exact. My guest today is Eric Cressey. Eric, welcome to the show, man. How we doing?
Thanks for having me, Robbie. I'm good.
I totally forgot to say, it's Cressey, right? Like Eric Cressey.
It's Cressey. You nailed it. You're
okay.
Better than any telemarketer that's ever called me.
Well, hey, we started the show off the right foot then.
There you go.
So fill the audience in with where you're coming from at this current moment.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess the Cliff Notes version is, grew up, I was an underwhelming athlete. I joke I was fantastically mediocre. And like a lot of people who weren't good enough to play at a really high level, I coaching was the next best thing to stay involved in the game. So I actually went to college thinking I was going to be an accountant. First started out, actually got recruited to play some college tennis and soccer, and tennis really chewed up my shoulder pretty bad. So, in the process of going to school for a couple of years and trying to figure out some health problems, including a bum shoulder, I kind of fell in love with training. And it just so happened that, I changed my major, went into exercise science, and then did my grad degree at the University of Connecticut, and really fell in love with kind of the strength and conditioning bug. So ultimately it led me to go into the private sector, and, some of that shoulder expertise I had kind of acquired just from taking care of my own shoulder, lent itself really well to some of the first clients I had, which were baseball players. And I always joked that first off season, back in like 06, I trained 4 guys. All 4 of them wound up going to Division I. They won a state championship, and one of them won State Player of the Year. And my phone rang off the hook, and it kind of hasn't stopped ringing ever since. They're just, high school guys became college guys became pro guys, and pro guys had teammates and agents and organizations that kind of facilitate referrals. So we now have 2 facilities, one in Hudson, Mass, where we started out, and a second location in Jupiter, Florida. We train guys from all 30 major league organizations. We've had over 150 players drafted in the last 6 years. We trained both Cy Young Award winners in 2017 and had 7 of the 30 organizational top prospects for pitchers that were just named by MLB Pipeline like yesterday. So kind of where we're unique is we don't just see big leaguers and we don't just see high school kids. We see literally people all along the baseball lifespan. So I have eighth graders that are now throwing 100 in pro ball. So it's been kind of cool to see that kind of developmental lifespan for the baseball athlete.
Yeah, that's a pretty dang good introduction, man. This is interesting because I've had some strength coaches on my show before, and we've hit it off as far as the conversation of, like, you would say, the evolution of training in the game today, right? And you're seeing these freak athletes now, whereas, maybe in like the 80s or earlier stages of baseball, it was kind of like that was the one sport where you didn't need to be in super top shape, right? You could just go out and have really good hand-eye coordination, eat hot dogs, and be good. So where do you you said you started it out in 06. Is that when you first got your facility in 2006?
We opened our facility in 2007. I moved to Boston in 2006, kind of a year after finishing grad school. So yeah, I was 25 and pretty green around the gills. What does that look?
So take me through that process. Like, what kind of prompted you to open up a facility? Because that's a pretty major step.
Yeah, for sure. So I think, like everybody else, that kind of goes in that route. A lot of times you see your clientele growing, and you seek a little bit more autonomy, and you want to make sure that the trains are all running on time, and you feel like you're the best person to do it. So, I guess I was a closet entrepreneur my whole life without even realizing it. I can remember I worked at a tennis club for 8 summers growing up, and I bought like a racket string machine and learned how to string tennis rackets. So I think I always had that entrepreneurial, kind of way about me.
I love it.
I think more than anything else, like my mom always jokes to me, she's like, you taught yourself to read with baseball cards. Like, you were bound to work in baseball eventually, even though you stopped playing in 8th grade. And I think, there was a great line, you guys are familiar with TRX training.
Yeah.
Randy Hetrick is the guy who founded TRX. And he had a great line in a story. People know Randy was a Navy SEAL. He was on a submarine in the middle of nowhere just trying to get a training effect, and he threw a couple straps over a pipe on a submarine and started doing inverted rows and pull-ups off it. basically tens of $1 million worth company. It was born out of it. And he said, if you want to start a business, solve a problem. And I think so many people go into business just to try to make money. And we went into business and we identified here is a massively underserved population. You have this demographic of baseball players that's either been, they've been given the foo-foo, here are your band exercises, don't lift weights, it's bad for you. Or they've been handed the football program, which is, clean squat bench and everything will just magically work out. And there's a great happy medium between the two where you can push guys incredibly hard as long as you're aware of what their structural limitations are, what the demands of their sports are. And, what helped me was I was an outsider. I had to do a lot more questioning, do a lot more listening to try to learn about, where I could effectively defy the traditionalism that frustrated so many baseball players. So, when you hear about guys who hate running polls and, guys that were always just told, we do this way because this is how we've always done it. We never did that.
Right.
We didn't know how it had always been done. And this is a hilarious story. One of my first big leaguers was Kurt Schilling. 41 years old. So here I am. It was probably 2009 when I got Schilling. So I was 27 or so when I first got him, and he had the first subpectoral biceps tenodesis in Major League history. So it was a new shoulder surgery that had never been done on a major leaguer. Mm-hmm. And I had a very good working knowledge of the shoulder. I knew his surgeon. I knew the physician's extender. So we were prepared to take it on. But I'll never forget, we were talking about going through the comeback bid. And he looked at me, and we were kind of planning out what the next 6 months would look like. And he's like, hey, are you cool doing PFPs? And I was like, what's that? I had no idea what it stood for. I was training big league, and it was on one hand, it was an interesting commentary of what can happen if you just listen and you show humility and you demonstrate that, I'm here to help. I'm going to expect you to teach me some stuff, but I'm going to stand on my head to learn as much as I possibly can and meet you where you're at. But at the same time, it was a reminder, hey, I'm an outsider. I got to study extra hard to be accepted in this world and all of that. And, that was obviously the start of, something that's turned out to be really, really awesome. And now I jump in, I catch bullpens and things like that. But it's, you have a lot of self-deprecating humor being an outsider in the baseball world. But I think, guys appreciated the fact that we were outsiders. We listened a lot more and didn't just tell them how it was going to be. We engaged them. We gave them an active role in the planning process.
Yeah, I didn't know you had Schilling, dude. That's a pretty crazy story. So I'm curious as far as the way that you guys have built over time. Is that literally just from players saying, is mostly hearsay, word of mouth, hey, I went to this guy was really good, and he does this and that, and then that's kind of how it's almost blown up over these last few years? Yeah,
I think word of mouth is 100%. Kind of our biggest, kind of component of driving the growth and the revenue and all that stuff.
Yeah.
It happens a lot. So Steve Cishek's been a client for 9+ years. Steve and I are neighbors. Our kids play together and all that. So I've known him since he was in low A before he ever even got to the big leagues and became a closer and all this stuff. And Steve is literally the nicest guy on the planet. He's the most wonderful human being you would ever want to hang out with. And in Steve's career, he's played in Miami. And then he went on. He was in St. Louis for half a season after the trade deadline. He signed with Seattle for a year and a half, was traded to Tampa Bay at the deadline, and now he just spent his first year in Chicago. And literally everywhere that Steve goes, he creates raving fans. So we wind up getting multiple referrals every year of guys. And and Steve has an agent who's referred guys to us. So a lot of times it starts with a player who has really good results. Mm-hmm. And then their agent takes note of it. The team takes note of it. So, I think over the years it's progressed from just being word of mouth to now teams are sending guys to us and paying for the training. We have scenarios where agencies will send guys us. They may pick up the tab, or they may just refer us. Right. The player picks up the tab. So it's definitely evolved. But what it always comes back to is I think we've done a really good job of, we're kind of Switzerland. We're very neutral. We get along well with everybody. I think if you asked around baseball, you'd be hard pressed to find someone that had a lot of bad things to say about us. Mm-hmm. So we really try to nurture relationships, meet people where they're at, and try to educate as best we can and have good communications with everybody on the team. Or I would say everyone on each athlete support team, whether that's their organization, whether that's their agent, whether it's a spouse, whatever it may be. We try to involve everybody in the process and and keep the peace while educating.
Yeah, so take me into like the actual the training, because I know how baseball players are. You know, everyone has their different philosophies and everyone has their different ways to go about their training. So are you implementing like your own type of training? Or are you working with certain athletes as far as like their program, like with what they're doing? Or are you implementing like full new strategies?
You know, I think it depends on where they are in their career. So like we started working with Max Scherzer in 2016 at the end of the season.
Right.
So Max was like, it was right around the time he won his second Cy Young. So here's a guy who's obviously had a ton of career success. I think he'd thrown 180 plus innings in like 8 or 9 consecutive years at that point. Max really had a pretty fine-tuned offseason plan, a very meticulously outlined progression of when he'd start throwing, what benchmarks he needed to hit, you know, certain things. And what you do with a guy like that is, you know, you push him, you keep things safe, you impart some wisdom. And what I found with Max is after, you know, our first off season together, you know, he had a stress fracture in his hand that we kind of referred him to get diagnosed for. And so that was a really crucial moment of him kind of buying in our stuff. And that was kind of a blessing in disguise because it opened his mind to, hey, you know, I've got the stress fracture in my hand. I'm going to start using the safety squat bar a little bit more. That way I can train. We started doing some barbell hip thrusts. And, you know, so they kind of like, they get exposed to a little bit more. So Max was an example of a guy who had a very, you know, refined routine that might be tinkered with over the course of time the more we spend with him. Whereas like a Corey Kluber, like I've had Corey since, you know, he was high A/double A, like early on in his minor league career. He's been very bought into our philosophies for 9 years. So Corey is phenomenal in the sense that he's great at giving feedback and all that, but literally he wants me to put it on paper and he will execute it to a T. Like I could write a program for Corey and tell him to go out and do jumping jacks in the snow and he'd do it just because he's so rigidly adherent to it. So that's really like 100% buy-in scenario. You know, like a Noah Syndergaard is a unique one too. Noah's like, I joke with him, he's like the biggest nerd we train. Like extremely well read on training, nutrition, to the point it probably can work against him sometimes where he wants to try so many different philosophies and the newest piece of equipment that you have to kind of keep him away from like the shiny object syndrome. So, you know, Noah will send along requests a week before a new program because he wants to try this, this, and this. And what's awesome about that is it challenges you. You have to basically justify everything that's in your program. You know, there has to be a meticulous rationale. And I'll challenge Noah to do the same. All right, why do you want to do that? What's that going to do for you? So I think it's really it's a challenging question to say is like, you know, what's your training philosophy? It's the philosophy is meet guys where they're at, understand how they learn best, and above all else, understand synergy. And that's a very broad term. So what I would say is that your program success does not happen in isolation, right? So, you know, we have a lot of high school kids, I'm sure they're listening to this podcast, you know, and a lot of these guys think that, you know, if they go and they hit till their hands bleed, they're magically going to get better. I'm like, well, that doesn't work. If you don't sleep at night and you eat like crap and you don't lift weights, like there are a lot of crucial factors that work hand in hand with that. Whereas if you have that same kind of drive and then you put on 40 pounds, you add 300 pounds to your deadlift, you start actually eating vegetables and going to bed on time, like it's going to accelerate your results. That's what happens at the younger level. At the higher levels, what you'll often see is you'll see a scenario where like a guy, you know, he loses 3 miles per hour when he tries to throw a glove side fastball because he's ripping off accidental cutters every time he tries to do it. Historically, what's happened in the baseball world is they've worked in silos. So you'd have the pitching guys, you'd have the sports medicine guys, and you'd have the strength and conditioning guys, and then you'd have the analytics guys, and they'd all be in different offices and they wouldn't communicate. And what we've done in our business is we've knocked all that down. We all speak the same language. We certainly have subspecialties that we're really good. Like I firmly believe I have the best manual therapist on the planet in my business partner, Shane. So Shane can put a guy on a table and do amazing things for him and get him off. And, you know, he can, you know, treat a neck and get, 40 degrees of shoulder and turn rotation in 10 seconds, like things that, are very proud. So I think what we often see in the baseball world is they'll take mechanics solutions to what are physical problems, or something to that effect. So we take a step back and we try to see how all those pieces fit together so that we can figure out what the right fit for each athlete is. So I wouldn't say there's one overarching philosophy other than you have to listen and you have to see what's worked and what hasn't for an athlete. And then you have to engage them in the process of what's going to be the next course of action. And that changes over the course of a lifespan. A 15-year-old kid doesn't have the foundational knowledge enough to be able to say, this is what's worked for me. The only thing a 15 year-old kid knows that's worked for him is puberty.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else is to be determined. A 25-year-old pro athlete who's got 3 years of minor league ball, 4 years of college strength conditioning, and a couple years of travel ball experience, they can share a lot more wisdom with you, so you can ask them those tough questions and you really engage them in the process.
Yeah, no doubt. And you hit on it. One of my next talking points wanted to be, like finding the why behind like training philosophies. And what I mean by that is like an individual, right? So like I told you before the show, is like a lot of my listeners will be, high school athletes that are really seeking out information, right? And trying to seek out proper regimens to uphold or whatever it is. And I think, with that being said, like we live in a dangerous society when those kids are very connected to online, and YouTube and whatnot, and they can simply Google whoever's training thing and then see it and then go, I'm just going to do that without really understanding why that individual is doing that. So, can you talk about like the importance behind like really putting an individual approach to the athlete?
Yeah, what I would say is in general, one of the biggest challenges in the baseball training community right now is that we've got an industry that's constantly sought to dumb things down.
Yeah.
They've tried to make it to the infinitesimal amount simplistic, and it doesn't work. So, and I'll give you a great example is, a lot of people like read my stuff and they say, you hate overhead pressing, you hate overhead work. I was like, no, like a TRXY or a bottoms up carry is like so massively different than like a barbell military press or a power snatch or anything like that. They're markedly different things. It's just that the people who are making those statements, they aren't even smart enough to know what those exercises do. Mm-hmm. Like, so, think about the number of people on the internet who are convinced they know how to prevent UCL tears when they don't even know what UCL stands for. Like, how many people are meticulously... Yeah, it's terrible. But like, I love Alan Jaeger. He's one of my closest friends in the industry.
Right.
How many people that are prescribing J-band series to their athletes for cuff strength and control even can name the 4 rotator cuff muscles. It's not happening. So it's a fatal flaw in the industry, unfortunately. And I think you see it in other capacities too. Like how many people, like, Kyle from Driveline's a good friend. Like how many people think Driveline is just about weighted balls? It's just what's sensationalized on the internet, when in reality they're doing a lot of great stuff with pitch design and things like that. So there's far more to it. I look at like Ben Fairchild's a close friend in Houston who works with some great big leaguers and does an awesome job down there. Is, from what you see on Ben's like profile, he doesn't even have like a strong online presence, but I think Ben's the best guy in the industry when it comes to like the nutrition side of things for pro baseball players. Like he gets through to guys so well on that front. And like you would never even be able to appreciate that unless you went and spent time with him. So I think we have to be really careful about just borrowing from what we see on Twitter or Instagram, because it gives a lot of kids calculus.
Right.
They probably ought to be spending more time on algebra. I don't even know if I just went on a tangent.
I know. I love that quote.
I forgot your question. I just literally just went off the deep end there. I apologize.
That's what makes a good podcast, though, dude. We'll start talking about cheeseburgers here in the next second. Hey, real quick though, you said the gentleman's name was Ben. I want to link his Instagram account in the show notes. So, do you have his full name?
Ben Fairchild. He's awesome. He works with Anthony Rendon. Tyler Beatty's one of our guys. He'll work out with him when he's down in Houston. So actually has a really... Mark Melanson's one of his long-term clients.
Cool. So like
Springer.
anytime we like talk about something, I just want to write that down so we can, for people wants to check that out, go on Instagram.
The lesson from that is they're actually really good people all over the place if you know where to look for them. If you're thinking to like getting an exhaustive education on Instagram or Twitter or something like that, you're going to be sorely disappointed. Like there are people out there that take a lot of pride in what they do and try to deliver a high quality product. But so just don't be that guy that falls for the clickbait. The one magical exercise,
Right, yeah, hey, this will make you throw 110. But I think the reality of the situation is like these kids, we live in a society of instant gratification, and 100%. they want everything in the here and now, right? And I'm saying this, like I fall guilty of that too, right? Like why wouldn't I want a program that guarantees me 10 miles an hour in 6 weeks, right? So what that does though, man, and for the listeners right now is like it takes away the importance of like that process and that hard work that gets put in. And I think that's very important about what you're doing, Eric, on your Instagram account, is like you're documenting that whole process, right? And like you're showing the importance of day in and day out, like everything that goes into it. And I think that's something that every kid needs to really, read between the lines and look at that.
Yeah. And I think, it was funny. We were actually listening to a podcast on our ride this morning. It was with Casey from Oregon State. And he was talking about I don't think kids have changed. I think the circumstances surrounding kids have changed. And it's up to us to positively impact that. Like, don't just assume that all these kids are hopeless causes. Like, podcasts like this, like there are guys that are going to listen to this and it's going to push out some of that instant gratification mentality. So a kid that's listening to a podcast trying to get educated, he's probably pretty invested in his career and trying to learn about, how to get better. So what I always tell guys is try to find that lowest hanging fruit before you try to go and try to find that sexy training solution that's been sensationalized online. Chances are you need to go to bed earlier. Chances are you need to eat better. It's funny. So I worked with Team USA in 2015.
Right.
I was a strength and conditioning coach with the 18U national team that went to Japan and won the gold medal. And to be honest, in that role, you're not really a strength and conditioning coach. You're much more like doing warm-ups. Like I was the bullpen catcher. and a lot more of my work actually was on the nutrition side of things, like preparing pregame meals, keeping on track guys. And I actually did a nutrition presentation for those guys. And I just asked them, we had 20 guys in the room. We had dudes. I mean, Mickey Moniak was our center fielder. He went first overall.
Right.
Hunter Green was 15 years old on that team. We had rock stars.
Right.
And you go and you look in the room, and I just said, hey guys, raise your hand if you drink soda or sweet tea. And there was probably 17 of the 20 arms go up there, and I was like, keep your hand up if you don't know that those are bad for you. And all the hands go down. And I quoted a line from Tim Grover, who was, Michael Jordan,
yeah.
Yeah, and Grover said, stop waiting around for people to teach you something that you already know.
Yeah.
That's not good for you. A green tea or a glass of water or something like that is going to be far more appropriate for your goals. But that's the issue, is that, there's a lot of really low-hanging fruit that you can work on. To get where you want.
Yeah, and I think it all goes back to, and this is something that I reiterate a lot in my show, man, is how bad do you want it, right? Like how bad do you want to be successful? To quote the great Eric Thomas is there's so many things that we can do in our day to really push us towards that end goal, right? There's how many kids out there saying I want to be a big league pitcher, I want to be a big league center fielder or whatever, but they still get 4 hours of sleep because they're playing Fortnite all night, and they're not.
It's astounding, and this is I'd say the hardest thing to teach a kid. It's the only one who can actually say it and help me do this is when we have high school kids interact with our pro guys at the facility. Mm-hmm. What the average middle school, high school, college kid that's listening to this podcast can't appreciate is just the sheer volume of the number of players out there. Mm-hmm. And I remember talking to Bill Decker, who was the head coach at Harvard last year, and there was actually 2 kids from the same high school hoping to go to Harvard at the time, and he's like, I'll be honest, he's like, I have 6 spots in that class for the entire country. The chances of me having 2 kids that come from the same high school who can fit that profile, who can make it academically at Harvard, it's just an astronomical thing. But parents don't appreciate that because they all think their kid is special. Mm-hmm. Kids don't appreciate that because, hey, I'm the best player on my team right now. I'm like, every single guy on your college team is the best player in the history of their town. Mm-hmm. And every guy in pro ball is probably the best player in the history of their county. Mm-hmm. And there are those guys that just don't make it. So we always try to we have a joke in the weight training community, no matter how strong you are, there's still a 120-pound Chinese girl warming up with your max. And baseball players really need to think like that. If you think you're a really good athletic shortstop in the U.S., there's probably 50 to 60 Venezuelan, Dominican kids that you don't even know exist that are out there that are miraculous at turning double plays that you can't even come close to.
Oh, dude, and it gives us a totally new appreciation to the sport, right? And
yeah,
it gives you go ahead.
And that's just baseball. I mean, I remember talking to Jeff Salzenstein, who's a top 50 player in the world, who's in the tennis world, and he does a lot of coaching now. And I remember him saying to me, right at the end of his career, he's like, college kids, they shouldn't even think about going pro unless they're top 2 in the country. He's like, well, there's so many players coming out of Eastern Europe and and Spain, all these places. Like, it's just the sheer like, there's a lot of people on the planet, and we're getting more and more people from Australia and Europe. It's just such a competitive pool that nobody can appreciate until they've been like, and it's the Mike Tyson quote, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth.
Or bite someone's ear off.
Yeah.
I think there's so much truth to that, man, too, because I was the big fish in the little pond, right? Like small high school, high round draft pick. And then it's not until you see it and you're in it. And then you're like, holy crap, dude. Because I remember specifically, like, how everyone kind of sits in their hotel room and instructs or whatever, and they try to visualize, like, okay, where's everyone going next year? Like, okay, they need 5 starters here, 5 starters here. And then you start, like, putting yourself in the organizational map. And I remember getting hit with the realism, like, holy crap, like, there's some studs in this organization. And that's not even to say, like, upper levels. You're talking like lower level minor leaguers. And then you just get hit. And I think and what I go with, like saying earlier, is like to learn how to appreciate that, which therefore like breeds harder work, I think, when you're younger. Like you said, cutting out soda, like these little things, right, that we can do, like making sure that, okay, I'm going to bed at this time, I'm doing there's the little things, I think, in our routines that we can always incorporate to just give us, just a slight bit of advantage. Even if it's not like otherworldly, it's still like that slight bit of advantage, which always ends up playing in the end game.
Yeah, and the funny thing, too, is I think what's helped me, I don't know if it's a funny thing, it's just a thing, but what's helped me is having perspective. So, like, we had 2011 was ranked as the best draft class since 1986. So it was, if you go back and look at that, it was Trevor Bauer went third, Garrett Cole went first. You had Jose Fernandez, you had Lindor, you had George Springer, Matt Barnes. So we had Tyler Beatty, and Tyler went 21st overall. And Tyler was probably my biggest prospect in Massachusetts, at least, ever. So it was very interesting to see what that meant. Obviously the dog and pony show of crazy amounts of advisors and scouts doing in-home visits and all this stuff. And watching 30 scouts at every single game go from the bullpen in right field, all to migrate behind the plate, it was like herding cattle. It was insane. But the thing that I always look back on is there were games where there weren't even foul balls. It was comical how much better he was than the other kids on the team. I don't think there was a game where he punched out less than 12 that year. You literally, to be a first rounder, you're talking a season where you maybe give up one earned run, and it was because a dribbler hit the bag and jumped over a third baseman's glove, and you're punching out 12 to 20 people every single time out. And in that year we had Adam Ravenel, who went on to Vanderbilt, became a closer, was a 4th rounder, and Adam was doing stuff very comparably. And people don't realize that's how good first rounders are. And they're not just punching people out. Tyler was doing it with a really highly ranked changeup, with a good breaking ball. So he showed kind of 2.5 pitches. If you're a high school kid who just throws 95 and maybe you strike out 8 or something like that, you're not good enough. It's shocking. But I look at that and obviously Tyler went to college and Vanderbilt won a national championship, became a first rounder again. And, so that's my perspective. So when I see a high school kid, it sounds like a jerk thing to say. I'm a little bit more cynical about it now. And I under promise in the sense that you can't go out and walk the house and not get out of the first inning. That's not an option.
Yeah.
First rounders don't do that. And even Tim Collins, Tim Collins put up the craziest minor league numbers I have ever seen. There was one year we punched out it was 99 guys in 60 innings or something like that in minor league baseball. It was every third day. It was a scoreless inning with 2 punchies, and there were guys that missed his curveball by a foot. And you face big league hitters, and if you don't throw that curveball for a strike, they're not going to swing at it. They're going to live on a 4-seam that's very straight. And if you talk to Tim, he went up and the Major League Baseball kind of responded to him, and what kept him in the big leagues was his changeup. But I always come back to these numbers when guys think they need to be promoted and all this stuff. I'm you don't know how good you need to be to not just be a big leaguer, but stay there and make a sustainable living. It's so hard.
Well, you know what? That was something that because my dad was privileged enough to play 10 years, 6 in the big leagues, and his big thing was always his goal when he was coming up was get to the big leagues. Yeah. And then he realized when he got to the big leagues, it was a different game because he had worked so hard to get there. Now it's how do I sustain this? because
hard thing.
I mean, it's one thing to get there, man. It's a whole different animal to stay there. I mean, I can't speak from experience, just from, everyone, kind of stories and whatnot. But I think that has a lot to do with it, right? And like setting your goals and changing your goals to like, okay, not only do I want to get there, I want to freaking stay there, man, and stay hungry. And I think something else that kind of depreciates the game is like those freaking guys make it look so easy on TV, don't they?
Yeah.
I mean, you got these. A lot of my audience, like I said, is like youth players that they watch the TV, right? They watch the 3-hour game and they watch the social media highlights, and it's like, oh, that looks easy. Let me just hit this 99 mile an hour inner third sinking fastball and hook it over the pole. What the heck? Did you see Arias' homer last night against Bueller? 99?
It's insane. I mean, I honestly, like, Blake Trinan's one of our guys. And
oh, God.
Just talking to Blake, like, so this year, he's always had, like, the turbo sinker. It's a one-seamer.
Stupid, dude.
And a really good slider he throws off it. He just started playing catch with a cutter over the last year or so and kind of, like, rolled it out in, like, June, July. And so, like, it's pretty nice when you have a 101 mile turbo sinker. You can just kind of add a 97 mile an hour cutter. But he force seems up, like, he's doing crazy things. It's just like, I have no idea how any the foot of anything goes. Like, they're literally guessing. Their only hope is that guys are going to tip or something like that. Baseball is really hard, and it will humble you really, really quickly.
Oh, dude, it'll punch you right in the freaking mouth. So I want to...
And we honestly, we're that's really fun too. Like, honestly, in the off season, like, the guys have those conversations. Like, when you hear hitters come back and like, that guy's stupid good. Like, I didn't have a prayer. Like, they'll be honest about it. And then, they'll joke about pitchers that own them. And just like, pitchers will talk about guys who absolutely dominate them. So.
Yeah. Well, it's always fun. The thing that fascinates me too is the dynamic between like one hitter owning a pitcher, but then like the next guy in the lineup being owned by that pitcher. Like, it's how everything like is a variation, right? Like, oh, I just see him really well, or I don't see him at all. Like, it's so. I think the game within the game in that aspect to me is like fascinating. And that's why like I'm always gonna love the game, because I can just appreciate those like inner battles. But yeah, man, that's good stuff. So I want to dive back into like the training, and I know we touched on it a little bit earlier as far as the demand for. I mean, shoot, you can't turn on a game right now and see a guy throwing under 95, right? Like, it's super rare. So I think the demand for velocity, the demand for home runs, just in the last decade has drastically improved. And so how much do you think that has to do with, like, the demand for the stuff that's happening in the weight room for guys?
I think it's a huge part. Like, I think what weight training can give, it can also take away. So certainly guys are throwing harder than ever before, and that's really more arm speed is more forces on the elbow, more forces on the shoulder. So I think that's where more of the the injuries that we've seen have potentially come from. I think that just speaks to the importance of, like, don't use your bullets up in the weight room. Like, what you're doing in the gym has to be safe, has to be executed with correct technique. It has to be based on solid assessment protocols that allow you to individualize as best you can. So I think that's part of it. I think also we have really advanced video technology. We have TrackMan, Rapsodo. We have all these pitch design softwares that allow us to be more effective in the way that we teach. I mean, just looking at like an iPhone, 3 years ago compared to now, we can do a whole lot more. But I just think you're right. There's way more amenities at your fingertips. Not from strength and conditioning, pitch design, you name it. The pitchers have the advantage. There's no doubt about it. I mean, we can make hitters stronger. We can make them faster, things like that. But their technology is just not up to par with what we're getting from a pitching standpoint.
Yeah, I also think there's the fact of I always go back to like the Latin players, right? And like for them to get off the island, they have to showcase a certain level of skill and ability. Yeah. And I think that's what's kind of happening in America now, in the U.S. with our game is like you have to showcase that 95 plus. You have to showcase that 5 o'clock freaking 450 dead central power, right? Like I think there's a big demand, because I remember when I got drafted, man, I was 2010 draft, and Northern California, and like I just remember throwing like 93, 94, and it being the biggest deal because I was 18. And like you said earlier, man, like now it's like you see an 18-year-old, they're up in the high 90s.
Yeah, and then the scary thing about it is if you look at the track record of triple-digit high school arms in the draft, they don't usually hold up very well.
Why is that?
Like, I mean, you think about it this way: you got skeletally immature athletes, and I think what you have is I think we really misinterpret, this concept of projectability. Like, to me, everybody seems to think that projectability is I'm skinny and I throw hard, so when I fill out, I'm going to throw even harder. I'd argue that you're not necessarily projectable. I'd call you a massive injury risk if you've basically generated elite velocity effectively because of your biomechanics as opposed to your true athleticism. You've fallen back on a lot of passive restraints for an extended period of time. If you don't have muscle mass and strength in the right places, you don't have muscles, you don't have tendons, taking stress off those ligaments, off those bony structures. Like, people forget, like, you go up and you sprint, and you're putting 4 to 6 times body weight and ground reaction forces, on every single step. Like, who gets hurt when they go out for marathons? Weak runners. It's like who have crappy running mechanics, things along those lines. So putting some strength in the right places can be a game changer. So you have to really find this balance of projectability. Like, to me, it terrifies me when I see a high school kid who weighs $150 throwing 97, who's got 120 innings on his arm every year in his high school career. Like, that's a massive red flag, especially if the delivery is not pristine or anything like that. If you take that same kid and maybe he's got some lead arm speed, but the usage is a little bit lower, and you've done your homework in terms of, we are actually going to be able to develop him. Like, yeah, then that's a projectable arm to me. But, it's funny, man. It's almost like the pendulum starting to swing in the other direction, is that it's never really hard to put strength and weight on guys and get velo anymore. Like, we've had a really good track record of doing it. Like, it's really hard to develop a big league curveball. It's challenged to have elite feel of a changeup. And, I think that, I don't want to say that the pendulum's coming back in the opposite direction, because I don't think we're going to start seeing a bunch of Tom Glavines go, top 10 in the draft. Right. But I think that the pitchability thing is something that they're starting to evaluate a little bit more, just in light of kind of the fact that everybody throws hard now. Like, or the game's just going to continue to get more specialized. We're going to have, more like openers who all come in throwing like 102 to 104 with 98 mile an hour sliders, and I'm completely wrong.
And I'm out of the game.
There's gonna be a limit to what like the human body can actually handle, and so it's an interesting kind of dilemma that we're dealing with, and certainly from a sports medicine standpoint, like, we're inventing surgeries to try to keep up with this. Sure. Like, how many people had heard of a UCL repair with an internal brace or a thoracic outlet repair 6 or 7 years ago in baseball? Mm-hmm. Now we hear about them all the time. Like, Jake Peavy ripped his lat off the bone, and they had to do that surgery. It was the first time they've ever done it on a baseball player. I've seen 2 this year. Yeah.
Well, I think I did it too, but mine was completely ripped.
But it's just scary. Sports medicine is trying to keep up with how effectively strength and conditioning and pitching development has built better arm speed, and how there's more specialization that's taken place to get guys to this point. So if you run with scissors, you're eventually going to fall and get cut.
Yeah, that's another good quote. I'll have to write that one down. Yeah. So I've been spending a lot of time with Josh Heenan. I know you guys know each other, and
Josh is great.
Yeah, awesome dude. I'm actually going to be moving to Colorado just for him.
Nice.
But he brought up a good point, dude, where it's like you talk about projectability, right? And I was in that same situation where I was 6'5", $180 coming out of the pool with the tux on. I was quote unquote projectable. But he brought up a point like, when are these organizations going to start looking at like specific strength numbers to determine, quote unquote projectability? Do you think that's something that organizations should do? I mean, talking about strength in the right places?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that we're ever going to get to the situation where it's ever truly evaluated like an NFL draft or anything like that. Obviously, you look at like a Brady Aiken type dynamic where everything was good to go, and then they looked at his elbow and it didn't match up. So that's the inherent flaw with some of this stuff, is that the way that it's collectively bargained, it's going to have to change on that side of things. So I don't know that we ever get to that point. I think that's on organizations to do their due diligence, and that information is 100% out there. You can find it if you want to. Like, you can tell where guys have trained, what they do. You can ask those questions. I just don't think they necessarily dig deeper enough. But you also have to be careful with placing just value on strength numbers.
Yeah.
I think we can both agree if you walked into most big league clubhouses and looked around, you'd be sorely disappointed in the 60 times. You'd be sorely disappointed in some of the strength numbers, and you'd definitely be sorely disappointed in a lot of the physiques. And that's not to say be sloppy fat, don't lift, and don't run fast if you want to be a big leaguer.
Mm-hmm.
The point is that it's very challenging to project success in the baseball world because there are a lot of traits / characteristics that provide for success just as much as true athleticism does. Guys with long fingers who can throw better changeups, guys with elite sports vision who can hit at a higher level. There are things like that are very, very hard to separate out. So I'm not saying don't train guys to get strong, but I am saying there's a point in time where there's such a thing as strong enough.
Yeah.
And Josh has done a good job trying to put those numbers in place. I think of all of Josh's numbers, I would say the thing I like the most in his formula is the 2.75 times height in inches.
Mm-hmm.
That is right on. It's actually super accurate with respect to my experiences. Like 6'3" to 205 is like the baseline for a guy who's 6'3". Like that's as light as I want you. And and you start to work up from there. So, when you get a kid who's 6'5", 180 pounds, like there's some pretty low hanging fruit. So, and usually that body weight is accompanied by some good strength gains and all that. But I think there's some merit to looking at that stuff, and I think Josh is doing a great job putting it out there.
Yeah, shoot, man, just from personal experience, that guy's trying to get me to 275 right now, and I'm grinding my face off when it comes to that, dude.
It may be the right fit, and like in fairness, like there's also like there's disagree versus dislike. I love Josh. He was at our facility and hung out earlier this year, and there are things I disagree with him on too on that.
Sure.
Like he made a comment. It had something to do with like I don't know if it's like a 2 times body weight reverse lunge or something like that. Everyone who does this will run a 6'4", a 6'5", 40. I was like, do you know what it takes to train for a body weight reverse lunge times 2? Like, there's a ton of risk factor there. If you get a guy who's got, symptomatic sacroiliac joint issues, some of those don't do well in heavy loading. Like, I have a couple big league guys I know right off the bat that if we tried to even train or test for that, like, that's a significant injury for them. They aren't going to handle it really, really well. So I think you just have to understand, like, are those guys freaky fast because they trained for that, or are they freaks who happen to be able to do that? And there's a really big difference there. It's like saying, hey, all these guys with long fingers throw really good changes. Sure. We should have these guys all hang from pull-up bars to make sure their fingers are longer. There's what you know and what you can implement.
Well, yeah, and not to mention like the whole dynamic between spin rates nowadays. It's like how do we figure out spin rates, right? Or do our fingers need to be stronger? So it's like now we need to look for that.
Yeah, I would say anecdotally there are absolutely physical interventions that you can put in that will increase spin rate. We've done some pretty creative stuff with like before and after interventions on Rapsodo with our onboard and our college program this summer, where we have seen guys. We've seen pro guys who have worked specifically on like physical changes during the off season without really any dramatic changes to pitch grips or mechanics or like that, who have seen spin rates go up. So there are things I think you absolutely could do, independent of all the pine tar discussions and all this stuff.
Yeah, we won't get into that.
That's a whole other ballgame. But like, anterior core control, like you have better trunk tilted ball release and, you control your rib cage better. You're going to stay on the baseball longer and be able to backspin it,
Yeah, absolutely. So I know if I'm a high school kid listening to this, you've said a couple times about strength in the right places for ball players. So what does that look like, if you can, like take me inside as far as, what do I need to do if I'm a 16-year-old junior in high school that I want to put strength in the right spots?
So the first thing I would say is, to me, it means that if you have range of motion, you need to be able to control it. And what we often see with like baseball players is they have like loads of external rotation in their shoulder passively, but they aren't strong in those end ranges at all. So, instead of just doing a lot of like band exercise with your arm at your side, like train up in that 90-90 position, work to be stronger, and lay back and train the positions that actually matter. But, that's more of a specific requirement. Speaking globally, like, if you're a high school kid, like it should be a pretty good goal, assuming no injury history or anything like that. You should be deadlifting in the 400s by the time you graduate.
Oof.
If you're really serious, like you can move those numbers, and you certainly get to a point where you don't maybe need to push that hard. But if you're pulling 3 plates aside, you're in a great spot and keep building on it. But before you head off to college, you should be capable of that if you've gotten involved at strength and conditioning at the right time. You've been consistent with your efforts. And what I would tell you is that that's not a lofty goal if you stack it out. I mean, you can do that with just basic linear periodization for most of these kids. But what typically happens is they have great off seasons, and then they completely fall off during the season, and they come back. So they take, 5 steps forward, then it's 3 steps back, and then 5 steps forward. And over the course of a high school career, like you can lose a lot of those gains. So I would just say in your high school years, you never want regression. There may be times when it flatlines in terms of progress, but it should always be a steady upward trend that's largely linear with maybe just a couple of kind of valleys there. So I think that's the first thing. I'd like to see a lot of single leg strength. Your ability to stand on one leg is super important. I don't tend to chase huge squat numbers or anything like that, but those are kind of big avenues for me that I think guys need to improve on is get your deadlift up. I like the trap bar just from a safety and a teaching standpoint, but being able to take a reverse lunge with 185 pounds by the time you're 20, like you should be able to do that. I would expect that of all of our pro guys. And historically, when we've had guys that have put some strength in the right place in those regards, they do well. And you have to. That's the funny thing about it is, like, I think you'll read about like velocity-based training and all that stuff, is like you have to build a foundation of strength before any of that matters. They've actually done really good research. Actually, it was on volleyball players that showed that volleyball players just train like jump training and stuff like that. Their peak power doesn't go up until they get stronger. You have to be able to squat a little bit more instead of just jumping all the time. So think of like strength as the glass, right? So you have this empty glass, and all those other athletic qualities, whether it's power, whether it's endurance, whether it's agility, whatever it may be, all of those things, even joint stability, that's the fluid in the glass. So the bigger you make that glass, the more of those sub-qualities that you can kind of plug in. And here's the nice thing about it, too, is strength sticks around. This is something that no one seems to ever talk about. This is what drives me bonkers about the way sometimes in-season programming is trained. But if you actually look at the research, once you've built a solid foundation of strength, it really doesn't detrain for about 25 to 30 days. And actually the same is true of aerobic exercise qualities. Well, all the more reason why guys probably don't need to be running so many pulls in season. The stuff that actually falls off the quickest is power. You can start to detrain like those speed qualities in as little as 5 days. So, a lot of these high school guys, once they built that foundation of strength, really they need to do something explosive pretty regularly to not just maintain, but to build those qualities. So none of this discussion matters though if you're weak. If you're weak, you can't put no force into the ground faster. It just doesn't work that way.
Well, I know even like during the minor league seasons, man, like a lot of people get timid, right? Like, there's a lot of programs in organizations that are like, okay, we want to, preserve that energy. We want that energy for the field. So, are you writing programs for guys in season? Like, all right, let's continue this upward climb.
Where appropriate, we certainly provide that service to our guys if they want it. The organizations are open to it, so we're very transparent with us. And we have certain organizations that reach out to us and encourage us to do that. Right. And we're on board with that. We communicate regularly with the staff and in place. And other places where it's much better dynamic and they have things under control, so they don't necessarily need us. But what I'll just tell you is, like, if you're really looking at what's happening like during the season, like you're far better off doing 2 sets of 3 than you are 2 sets of 12. And that's one of the silliest things that you could, that one of the silliest mistakes you can possibly make, because that endurance is going to stick around pretty well. That strength and the power development, the rate of force development you get from working hard to put force in the ground quickly is not going to necessarily stick around quite as easily.
Yeah, it's just tough for me, man, because I'm a meathead. So I love sticking around in the weight room, man. I'm doing 20 sets of 2, 3.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a place for that. That's the off-season time period and all that. But it's the in-season where you get the benefit of kind of pulling back on the reins because you put your work in and build work capacity in the off-season. There was a line I had I can't remember to a team. It's like the best recovery solution is to never develop a work capacity problem. And that's why I think the off-season side of things is just so important. That's where you build that foundation that sustains you the rest of the year.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, one last topic that I want to touch on, and then sure. I'll let you go. But I know, obviously, in this day and age, when it comes to baseball training, like weighted balls being a huge tool, huge implementation to a lot of people's programs. If I'm not mistaken, you actually incorporate some weighted ball stuff into your routine. And what is like the why, and what is the science saying behind that?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is weighted balls have been around way longer than anybody who are kind of like We've used weighted balls in some capacity since 2007. Obviously, you have Kyle, you have Tom House, you have a lot of people in the industry who have put it out there. More so in recent years. Like Corey Kluber's used them every offseason since 2009 in some capacity. I'd say that 95% of our pro guys use weighted balls in some capacity during their throwing program. And the number as you work your way down, like a little bit less on the college side, a little bit less on the high school side. You earn the right to do it because it's an advanced training option. But you really have to think about, like, Derek Johnson was using it at Vanderbilt before Twitter or Instagram existed. And even before that, you had people in the, like Eastern European track and field throwers were using weighted implements for decades before baseball ever even began to sniff it. So, and certainly we have research now that's showing that, they aren't necessarily more stressful on the arm, which is what the argument was for a lot of people. But I would argue that it's that same calculus before you've actually mastered algebra. Like, you need to be able to throw a 5-ounce baseball. You need to know how to command a fastball. You need to work on certain things like that before you start getting too aggressive with that. And you need to also understand that, if your mechanics are markedly different with a weighted ball, if you're running away from your arm, you're getting really late with your arm action, then it's not a productive initiative. But at the end of the day, think about what weighted balls do. It's a modified version of like post-activation potentiation. Like, yes, I understand the discussions of arm shaping. Like, maybe it can make guys a little bit shorter and, get their elbow, inside 90 degrees, as they lay it back. But I think more than anything, if you look at post-activation potentiation, if I have you go and squat 315, Robbie, and then you go 30 seconds later and do a vertical jump, you're going to feel like you can jump really damn high.
Yeah, pap training.
Yeah, exactly. So whether that's a 5-ounce ball to a 3.5-ounce ball, or whether it's an 8-ounce ball to a 5-ounce ball, you're creating a level of contrast. There's a neuromuscular training effect that's taking place. And what I think we've seen that's happened in more recent years that's made it more of like a challenging discussion is that the contrasts have become more extreme, right?
Right.
So, you go and you throw a 2-pound ball and then you go right to throwing a 3-ounce ball, like you're playing with fire. Like, it's a massive contrast. And you wouldn't take that high school kid who's $160 and throw 600 pounds on his back, to try to create a bigger contrast because there's a risk factor with it. Here's what I would say. The biggest red flag for me, the guys we will not use weighted balls with, if you're a weak, hypermobile kid, that is like a dangerous combination. Because what we know is when the average person starts any throwing program, they will gain external rotation. The major league average, I want to say over the course of the season, is about 5 degrees if you look at the research. Mm-hmm. That's an average, though. So if you take a bunch of big leaguers that gain about 5 degrees of ER over the course of a season, you're going to have guys that are stiff as a board who might not change at all. You may even have guys that lose external rotation. And then you're going to have the crazy hypermobile guy that loses 20 and is like an outlier that totally throws off the number in that study.
Sure.
That's the guy that is going to be up shit creek without a paddle with weighted ball stuff. Sure. Because he's going to on-ramp quickly. He's going to have no end-range cuff control. And the only thing that's going to protect him as he lays his arm back to an extreme amount of external rotation is going to be an ulnar collateral ligament. It's going to be a medial epicondyle stress fracture. It's going to be a slap tear, something that, an anterior capsule injury. We've seen shoulder dislocations with weighted ball programs. That's unheard of. That used to be a football injury where you had to fall on an outstretched arm, or, they had to be a first baseman trying to make a tag. We've seen Bankart repairs in people who have gotten too aggressive with weighted balls. So if you're weak, you're really hypermobile, those are big red flags. And here's the easiest safeguard to all this is start a throwing program conservatively. Don't think you need to basically sell out for the dream in week 1. Take 2 to 3 weeks of playing catch with a 5-ounce baseball. Gradually build up your long toss out to 90 to 120 feet. It's like turning the furnace on for the first time in the winter. You're just like getting the air out of the pipes and gradually gain some of that external rotation back. Give yourself an opportunity to build stability through that range and then initiate it. So our pro guys, if you look at we keep actually a lot of our guys very similar across month 1 when they start their throwing programs. First month is building up long toss out to about 120 feet. The only thing that they'll do weighted ball wise, they'll do some reverse throws from half kneeling position in weeks 3 and 4, and we'll start doing some pivot pickoffs in weeks 4 or 5 depending on the guy, and then weeks 5 plus, it's time to get after it. So, if you get a pro guy that maybe didn't get a ton of innings and they want to start their throwing program November 1st, really December and January and potentially all of February if it's a minor league guy, those are our big work periods where we've got 14 weeks to really get after it. And that's plenty of time to see some really big changes, but it has to be sequential. And And here's where it fails miserably in the college game. Because the problem with college is ramp up, shut down, ramp up, shut down. Here's a week off for exams. Oh, you got 7 weeks over the course of the year, even if it was 2 days here, 2 days there. There's no easy time to integrate an aggressive throwing program in the college game. And I think the most dangerous thing is college coaches taking ready-to-print programs and handing it out to an entire team.
Right, so, cookie cutter.
Exactly. It just does not work on that schedule, especially when you have some guys that threw 40 innings, some guys that threw 120. They're all on different schedules because of summer ball or lack thereof. So you just got to be really, really careful in the college game. But for like the pro guy or the high school kid who has, complete say-so over his yearly calendar, like you can do some awesome stuff, and weighted balls can be a really good part of a cohesive longer-term plan.
So, I mean, you talked about like a throwing program, and it's funny because that's a lot of the questions that I got on my Instagram was like, when it comes to pro guys or high school guys, in throwing programs, are you encouraging like a specific type of program, or is it all based on the individual?
So we have pitching coordinators at both our facility. Brian Kaplan's at our Florida facility, and Christian Wonders is at our Massachusetts facility. Christian's CSP_pitching on Instagram. He's got great stuff.
I follow him. He's great.
Cap is social media averse. That's my goal for this year, is to get him on Instagram. He has a lot of really good stuff to teach. I know I'll never win that battle, but I figure if I put it out publicly, more people will tweet at him to tell him to get on Instagram. But those guys tend to take the lead, and a lot of times we kind of do three-way conversations, with myself, the athlete, and Brian or Christian, where we're all discussing, kind of what is going to take place from a throwing program standpoint in relation to the mechanical struggles they have. So what lead-up drills are we going to work with, what their history was with all that. So we individualize all of our throwing programs just like we individualize, all of our strength and conditioning programs. And a lot of that also works hand in hand with, we do a fair, actually quite a bit of video analysis, some pitch design stuff, sequencing stuff. So, it's funny, we're kind of known as a strength and conditioning facility who happens to do pitching,
right? Even
though we actually do a lot of pitching. It's just kind of not out there necessarily.
Yeah, I gotcha. And then to just bring this whole thing full circle, man, I think a big thing that I'm taking from this is just understand like the why behind things, right? And like not really just do things just to do them with no purpose. I know that's a dangerous territory with the social media world, especially when it comes to the weighted balls, right? Like that's a whole nother thing is people see the weighted ball pull downs, 3 ounce, 110 miles an hour. And then they're like, oh, I guess I'll do that because so-and-so does this and he's in the big leagues. But I think, again, it goes back to understanding who you are, what you bring to the table, and then how you can improve that.
So here's like a really fast analogy that I use, actually really, really common. Robbie, let's say you move to Florida this offseason, and we put you on an aggressive strength and conditioning program. We get you individualized mobility prescriptions. My business partner does some manual therapy on you. Maybe there's a subtle mechanical change that we give you. Maybe you switch from a 2-seam to a 4-seam. You gain 30 pounds. You start training med ball harder than you ever have before. We get you on a throwing program. There's long toss. There's weighted ball. There's king of the hill. There's the core velocity belt. There's all these things, and I also have you go out and I have you do naked jumping jacks in the park. I
already do those,
right? And exactly. So you're meticulous about them, and then at the end of the off season, you're up 8 miles per hour. What did it? We have no idea. It's
the naked jumping
study. Exactly. There is no control group for that study. Every single person listening to this podcast is a sample size of 1. So we cannot separate out, hey, was it 1% mobility work, 7% med ball, 10% strength,
and equals 1
weighted balls? Exactly. So everybody wants to go and look to say, like, what's the most sensational thing? Because there's nothing sexy about a bodyweight lunge for a kid who can't do a bodyweight lunge.
Not going to get many views on Instagram.
Yeah, nobody cares that you got some adductor length and were able to, basically stand your back hip a little bit longer on the mount or something like that. Like those things aren't sexy, so they automatically gravitate towards that shiny object syndrome. Yeah. So you always have to take a step back, and this is also why, as an athlete, you never overhaul. If you've had good success, if you're a pro baseball player, let's be honest, you're already in the top 1% of people who play this game. You should never overhaul. You should never drop one philosophy that's worked for you and go to another. You tinker. You change that 1 to 2% to try to find that competitive advantage that's going to take you to that next level. So, and that's where it always comes back to like this: just don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Figure out what works, keep it, and add subtle things that can make a difference for you. And that's what you look at like Scherzer, he did that last year with a couple different exercises and like fine tuning his curveball. Like you see Kluber, he changed his 5-day rotation in season. It made a huge difference for him. These are the things that can be really, really profound, over the long term in a career, but you never throw out what's worked.
Yeah, you never reinvent the wheel in this game. Unless
exactly.
You're totally reinventing yourself. But
yeah.
Hey, man, I want to be respectful of your time. Sorry we went a little bit longer, but
no worries.
Such good stuff, bro. Thank you again for coming on. Real quick, where can my audience find you? I'm sure they already know, but go ahead and shout it out.
I'm pretty easy on social media. It's just Eric Cressey on both Twitter and Instagram. It's ERICCRESSEY. And then the facility is actually on both as well. It's Cressey Sports. A free presentation you guys can watch. That's just ericcressey.com.
All right, man. I will link all of that and everything we talked about in the show notes as well.
You're the man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, dog. I'll sign you off the air. Appreciate you.
Awesome. All right. Have a great day, guys.
All right, guys. That's another episode of The Robbie Rowe Show. Do me a favor, if you liked the episode, or even if you didn't like it, go ahead and leave me a review on whatever platform you're listening to. Not only does it help me out with popularity on my show, but it also helps me out as a host of this podcast. Sometimes I don't know if I'm getting better or if I'm getting worse, and I need y'all's opinions. So go ahead and leave a review and let me know what you thought. So again, thank you so much. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Until next time, Robbie Rowland, The Robbie Rowe Show. Your boy's out. Later.